Hey, Alex, happy July.
Thank you, Kiah. Happy July to you too, and happy new apartment, new
Happy new
context,
apartment.
new podcast
Yes,
studio. It's like a whole new
yes.
Kiah.
I moved this month, July, and I have become a friend with a pool, which I think is very exciting
That is
for
exciting.
me and all my friends. The social capital that I have just accumulated, especially right now in Nashville because it's very, very hot, like heat dome hot. I know you were complaining about Minnesota or sorry, not Minnesota, Montana.
Montana.
Different, yeah, northern state, but it just can't compare. I'm sure it
It
just can't compare.
definitely, it definitely doesn't. I mean, we're wimps about heat. So like I tried to make that clear in the newsletter. I'm like, I'm
Hmm.
not trying to compare because it's not the same, but it has been very hot for us. I work in a building that is very old and does not have
Mm.
any concept of air conditioning or even like windows that open. So
Yeah.
it's getting a little hot. But let me ask you a question about
Okay.
the friend with a pool thing because a theory I have about
Okay.
this is that the social capital that you get by having a thing that your friends can use
Yeah.
is entirely a function of you taking on the inconvenience of a thing that people want to use, but not to be responsible for. So it's like friend with a pool,
Friend with a
friend with a
boat.
boat, friend with
Yeah.
like a hot tub. Like there's like a set
Yes.
of things where it's like an absolute like bitch to own it.
Yeah.
But if you just get to you know, like kind of come in and use it and not have to deal with
Hmm.
any of the consequences, like that's the best thing ever. So social capital is the inverse of the inconvenience we take on by having the thing. Although I guess for you, like your apartment complex manages the pool, right? So like
Yeah,
it's
I
not
was
too
gonna
bad.
say this is not like it's funny because I was gonna make a joke about tragedy of the commons
Yeah.
because of how I might use these resources
Right.
and then just invite other people and fortunately for me and unfortunately for my apartment I have a lot of friends who would who value my friendship and value my status as a friend with a pool.
Sure.
But yes, it's all upside for me, which means it's even more upside for my friends,
Right,
right?
because they're not going to feel bad about like, oh gosh, we're asking Kiah to like do this thing and like she's going to have
Yeah,
to do a lot of pool maintenance or whatever. You just get to pass this on. You're like the
right.
gateway to pool.
Completely, completely. And
That's
then
fantastic.
I don't have to go to their houses. They have to come to me. So it like kind of
Convenience.
minimizes some other inconveniences in my life or relative conveniences.
That is nice. I've always had a theory that this is related to payments, which we'll probably talk about in the podcast. But my theory in payments, which I think also applies to friendships, is that one party has leverage and the other party doesn't. And
Okay.
so, like
Whoa.
in payments, you can force the other party, if you have more leverage, to accept the form of payment that you want to
Sure.
use, right? So, like
Sure.
with credit cards, I know you don't want to pay interchange fees, but I want to pay with a credit card and I have more leverage, so you have to accept
Right. You
credit
want my money
cards.
more than you don't want to pay the interchange fee.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
even though we don't think about friendships this way and we shouldn't think about friendships this way, there is an undercurrent of friendships being a function of, well, like I have the pool, so I win, so you have to come to me.
Yeah, maybe I'm about to discover how much of my well, and you know what though? I will say my friends were friends with me before I acquired the pool. So I feel
That's
like they
true.
are actually my friends.
They're
So
not like they're
in the
not like new
future,
pool friends. Yeah.
yeah, in the future, I will have to be a little bit more wary of my friendships because I will understand that I have leverage over everyone.
Exactly, exactly. It's like when you're rich and you like think everyone just thinks you're really funny, but you're not. You just have a lot of
Yeah.
money. Like I think it's a corollary of that. So good
Yeah.
thing to keep in mind.
So the other thing too, and I'm kind of going through my post World Cup depression haze. But the monoculture
Yeah,
of the World Cup is over,
I
and
know.
I'm really sad about it. Despite not really, I didn't watch the second half of the final because I was watching the Odyssey in 70 millimeter.
Yeah.
And so I missed the Spanish goal, but I'm happy Spain won. And I
Mm,
wanted to ask you
mm.
that given that Spain was the favorite to win the World Cup at the start,
Yeah.
and they did win the World Cup on Sunday, are prediction markets truth telling machines? Have they been validated by this outcome?
I hate that question so much, Kiah. And you knew that I would hate that question.
If one, then the other, clearly.
Well, I mean, so a couple things on that, and then some general World Cup thoughts. No, not truth-telling machines just because they won. And the way you know that is that all of the non-prediction market sports books also had Spain as the favorite. So there's other ways to predict the future than just going through prediction markets.
If you say so.
The prediction markets apparently did print a ton of money because of the World Cup. So
good for them. Yeah.
They love the monoculture and things people want to bet on just as much as anybody else. I did get a chance to watch both the consolation game and the final game. And I will say my two observations, which sort of like fit into my broader theories about sports. One is that the Argentinian goalkeeper was the real hero of that game. And it sucks that so much of our understanding of sports, especially retroactively, is colored by the results because it's like, played his heart out, lets in one goal in extra time, and just because his team can't freaking score any goals means that, like, he now doesn't get to be a hero. Like, he played one of the greatest games ever for a goalkeeper at that, like, stage of soccer, and yet, like, won't be remembered as, like, giving one of the greatest performances ever. I think that is a tragedy. And then the other thing I realized watching the championship is that, Messi not being able to be the hero and sort of come through is not that surprising, really, right? Like, he's old. This is his third World Cup, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And, like, obviously it was Spain's plan to just not let him touch the ball at all, which is a smart strategy.
Crazy strategy over there. Is
it's like
really
maybe
handicap the star player.
Right. Yeah. Maybe like the greatest player ever. We're just not going to let him touch the ball. Like, smart.
Yeah,
okay. That makes sense. And it struck me that everyone wanted, I think, like, not Spanish people, obviously, but everyone else wanted, like, sort of like one great Messi game to just sort of like cap off his career. But that mostly doesn't happen in sports. And it made me appreciate, like, the Michael Jordan going out on top sort of storybook ending thing that sometimes happens in sports. Like, it's very rare because, like, you have to be great and be great for a long time, but also know exactly when to stop so that the story has a natural, heroic ending. Like, not so much most of the time. Real life doesn't usually work that way. And that was another example of that.
It's funny how you're like, I wanted these two individual players to stand out, but, like, soccer is famously a team sport and famously like what I call a flow sport. So there's just, like, so much back and forth. And you're so right about, like, a goalkeeper can make 11 saves and let the 12th one in. Yeah. And, like, that's the game. And I don't think that the 12th one in negates the 11 per se. And I also, like, as a referee, I really don't a lot of shots on the goalkeeper actually are defensive errors.
Yeah, no, totally.
And so, I would probably never fault a goalkeeper for letting a goal in unless it was, like, clear goalkeeping error or clear ability to save, which I don't think the one that he let in was. No. But I was also really interested in how all the technology, the way that, like, cameras are coming into sports, and we're very used to it in American football. Yeah. But the cameras on the referees, the attempts to blade of grass offside calls. And then to say, like, were people happy with that? Did it feel fair? Did it feel righteous? How many goals should we allow in soccer where any part of the body other than the hands or arms were offside? Right. Is kind of it felt like we were kind of, like, debating that in real time. And I thought that was really interesting. And I hope that, the way that technology tried to impose fairness on the game and whether that felt real or not real or good or not good, I hope people, like, think about that as they think about the games that they see or watch or play in, and then also maybe recruit a few referees to the dark, people to the dark side become referees.
Well, I will say on that note that I think and American football, I think, understands this almost better than any other sport in the world. There's a huge difference between using technology to make the game more accessible to fans versus using technology to try to make the game more fair. Yeah. And what American football does that's brilliant is they use the technology to put you, the television viewer, in the game. Like you have the perfect bird's eye view. It's a better experience watching it on TV
Then
than
being
watching it in
there.
person,
Yeah.
which is crazy. But that's like definitely true in football. And I think that same technology is filtering into all the other sports. Like now we
Right.
can see all the different angles. Hockey is so much more accessible to me because the camera can now follow the puck and I can see
Yeah.
exactly where it is. Like that's amazing. But what football didn't do, which is smart in America, is they didn't let instant replay like overpower the experience of the game and the flow of the game. And
Yeah.
I got to say, like almost every other sport, basketball, non-American football, baseball, like a bunch of other ones, they get way too wrapped up in like, we have the technology to make the right call, so let's make the right call every time.
Yeah.
And who gives a damn if we stop play for like what feels like an hour to me watching the game? Like, I don't care enough. Just make the call. And if it turns out it was a horrible call, like we'll all just live with it. Like I want to live in a world where we just trust referees, Kiah. That's what I'm saying.
I would also like to live in a world where we trust referees. We don't live in that world with technology. We don't live in that world without technology. So but I really cannot, like, I would love to respond to what you just said, but as I just said, I am incapable of being
I know
about this. And so
this would become the whole podcast if I let you keep going.
Unfortunately, we have to move on to other things that happened in late June and July. I've kind of alluded to this, but like sometimes the news is just like a story that happened several months ago, and then we just got another update to that story.
Yeah.
And I felt like we actually got some like a little bit of like new news in July. So as a summer treat for us. And the first one I wanted to mention to you was actually a check-in of a partnership that was announced last year to great fanfare because it was kind of a marriage of like two esteemed houses in financial services. It was a partnership between JPMorganChase, which is the largest bank in the United States by assets, and Coinbase, which is a very large, maybe the largest cryptocurrency exchange. And it was just a partnership it was an update on the partnership between the two of them from the information. Alex, how is this partnership going?
Well, first of all, you teed that story up as if it was like Romeo and Juliet, like the Montagues and the Capulets.
Two houses
finally,
alike in dignity.
That's what I'm saying. So this, it was a big deal that Romeo and Juliet were getting together, and I'm glad the information checked back in on this story. I think one of the like most underrated tricks in journalism is just like put a reminder in your calendar to circle back on this thing that was announced. And like they did that, and then they did the work to report the story. And what they found is that almost nothing has happened. So
oh my God.
I know, it's shocking. And I would like Kiah to recap the main sort of thrust of what this deal was.
Okay.
And describe it to you. And as I describe it to you, I think what you will feel as if I'm describing like a completely different era of history. Because even though it was only a year ago, the terms of this deal make it feel like it was 100 years ago. So
let's go.
Originally, what each party was supposed to get, Coinbase was supposed to get out of this partnership, Chase allowing its ultimate reward program that they run for their credit cards, for those rewards to be redeemed for USDC, so Circle's stablecoin, on Base, which is Coinbase's L2 blockchain network. That was not something that happened, and I'll get to sort of the updates on that made it not happen. But before I do that, what JPMorganChase was supposed to get, and this is such a strange, like, okay, you get these things, we get this instead. What Coinbase was going to give Chase was instead of using Plaid to connect Coinbase's customers' wallets to their Chase bank accounts so that they could fund their Coinbase accounts, instead of doing that through Plaid, Coinbase was going to use JPMorgan Chase's open banking APIs directly.
Okay.
Now, you might remember that in July of last year, one of the biggest priorities that Chase had was trying to get Plaid and others to pay for access to their open banking data. And this deal with Coinbase was, I think, the only publicly announced arrangement where essentially Chase was going to be courting large fintech and crypto customers of Plaid's and getting them to connect directly rather than going through Plaid. So this was an attempt to exert leverage over Plaid so that Chase could get a deal on the terms that it wanted to get.
Sure.
Now, if you fast forward through all of this, here's what's happened since this deal. JPMorganChase signed a deal with Plaid to get paid for its data. So I guess that gambit worked. And from what I understand, the Coinbase usage of JPMorganChase's API had not happened at the time, did not ever happen, and Coinbase never actually moved off of Plaid. So literally just like using a press release to help in your negotiations was
I
what
love
happened
that.
there.
Yeah.
So no need to ever have that integration ever actually go in place. Coinbase, you might have heard, and I think we're going to talk more about this in a minute, hedged its stablecoin bet because it has this great deal in place with Circle to get paid for distributing USDC by joining with Stripe and others on the open stablecoin, OUSD, which is trying to essentially kill USDC. So now USDC, which Coinbase was really pushing through this partnership with Chase, not so much a priority as it was before. Base, the L2 blockchain, Coinbase just spent the last year or so essentially making themselves look stupid by building an app on top of that blockchain called Base, also called Base, the app, which they tried to make into a sort of social and meme-driven like trading and games app that was a complete and utter failure to the point where Coinbase had to completely pivot away from that and reassign the executive who was in charge of it to do something else at Coinbase instead. And then finally, what has happened since then, this was originally right after the Genius Act was passed, and it was sort of like, okay, we're all going to come together, we're all going to be friends. You know, banks and crypto companies can get on board with, you know, the Genius Act. This is now the law of the land. No, because one of the things that the Genius Act tried to do, but did not do very well, was to ban stablecoins from offering yield, which is an issue that Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, feels very, very strongly about allowing. And Coinbase found some tricky ways to get around the Genius Act's attempt to ban stablecoin issuers from offering yield. And Coinbase attempted to try to keep that loophole open through the negotiations on the Clarity Act, which is the other piece of legislation, which in more than a year has not actually been finalized or approved by Congress, let alone signed by the president. The Clarity Act fight continues, and the reason it's been drawn out so long is that Brian Armstrong refuses to go along unless he gets what he wants on the yield prohibition, and that has made him, I think, perhaps Jamie Dimon's least favorite person, which was dramatized when both of them were at Davos in Switzerland and at the World Economic Forum. And apparently, according to reporting, Jamie Dimon like literally physically confronted Brian Armstrong and shook a finger in his face and told him to his face that he was full of shit. So all of that plus a lot more has happened in the last year.
In
and because
one
of that,
year.
You might be surprised to hear that this partnership, according to the information, none of it actually has come to pass.
Wow, that is quite the recap. And crazy how, as you were talking, I was kind of envisioning in my head, like, how like alliances and or like you know, they were friends and then everything kind of moved and shifted and now they're like enemies. And like my question for you, Alex, is like how much, like what percent of what you just described was predictable, a predictable outcome if we had just kind of let the chips fall? And what percent was a surprise to you in this, between these announcements?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I had to look back on it, I think the tell was that almost none of what the actual things were in the partnership were like actually big things that mattered at all. You know what I mean? And so I always judge partnerships based on like how much of it is them trying to make it feel like we have this big strategic alliance, to your point, to use your language, and how much of it is we actually are doing tangible things together that are important. And all partnership announcements are a combination of those two, but I think you can judge them based on, okay, like, what's the substance you're sharing here? And they're always framed as like, well, we're doing this big alliance, but the first couple of things we're doing are these specific things. And if the first couple of things they mention are like, what is this? I don't get this. Why is this a big deal? Why is this a point of emphasis? Who's going to use this? Why is this valuable? If it's all just a bunch of those things and like there's no value that you can discern in any of those initial announcements, you can, I think, draw a pretty good conclusion that the Grand Alliance is more, this is something that is convenient to both of us to announce at this exact moment, but we are not committed to each other at all. It's more, I would make the analogy like, do you remember when Taylor Swift and Tom Hiddleston were supposedly dating that one summer, but they were never actually dating, and it was just like a publicity stunt? It reminds me a lot of that, where it's like celebrities dating for the narrative and the vibes, but they don't even like each other, and they seem to have no relationship on a human level at all. This reminds me of that a lot, where it's like, it is convenient to us at this time for various reasons. Chase is fighting with Plaid. Coinbase wants to make a big deal post-Genius Act about how banking is getting integrated with stablecoins. It is convenient to both of us to appear like we're dating, but we don't really like each other. We don't know each other. And it turns out when we get to know each other a little bit, we actually fucking hate each other. And that was Brian Armstrong and Jamie Dimon. And so, I think it was pretty obvious even early on that this was not going to go anywhere. And ultimately, and I'm curious for your take on this, Kiah, like the core problem is Coinbase wants to be Chase, right? Like it wants to be a mainstream retail banking service provider that just so happens to be built on top of blockchains and crypto, but like it wants to offer a checking account. It wants to have a direct deposit. It wants to offer savings. It wants to offer lending. It offers a credit card.
Payments and,
wealth management. Like it wants to do all the things Chase does. And so just in terms of its ambitions, like it wants to be Chase. And so there is no real way for them to partner because their ambitions are the same. And I think that fundamentally, like, I guess my question for you is, when banks look at crypto, do they see competitors? Do they see potential partners? Because like this one, it seems obvious that Coinbase wants to compete with banks.
You know, it's interesting because I think, going back to a year ago, this announcement might have come from a place where banks felt very behind on crypto, or they felt like they needed to kind of align with crypto because crypto had more political capital or was, obviously getting more attention from legislators. They also, I think it was, trying to make someone your friend before they become your direct competitor. Like there's like maybe a moment where they were like, maybe we can work together somehow and lessen the competitive threat. But, the other thing that I'm thinking about is at the time, who needed whom more? Did Coinbase need JPMorgan more? Did JPMorganChase need Coinbase more? And I think one of the things, especially from my perspective, being in traditional bank reporting, who then has to like learn against her will all of these things about crypto, is that like this was a veneer of legitimacy for Coinbase, not for like I think, and that Chase doesn't need the legitimacy per se, but Chase might be behind in some regards.
Yeah.
Now, I also think one of my like beliefs or like narrative truths that I subscribe to right now is that like banks do not recognize the competitive threats that they face or have not weighted them enough or have not. And so a year ago, JPMorganChase is maybe trying to do something with Coinbase, not understanding that Coinbase wants to be JPMorgan, and not understanding that in a year, Coinbase will do a series of things that try to erode and unbundle and re-envision some of the services that JPMorganChase offers. And maybe like Chase is like a big enough company where I'm like, you probably will never do like, you'll never do the lending, but my research with master accounts and then crypto's interest in master accounts and then stablecoin and what stablecoin means for like, what does it mean if most of banking becomes about payments and not about, which can look kind of like maturity transformation, but isn't in really, really important ways. And so if like, maybe that wasn't obvious to everyone like a year ago, like what the natural progression of these actions was and what the outcome would be. But I was kind of surprised that like, why would Chase use its veneer and how much attention it gets from the media and how much like, and its consumer base, why would Chase want its customers to use its ultimate rewards in this way rather than like, I mean, here's the thing. I'm a big ultimate rewards person, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I have, I think, 12 credit cards from Chase. Okay.
Yeah.
So why, if I'm Chase, do I want to tell Kiah Haslett to put her reward somewhere else? Why don't I just tell Kiah, hey, if you want to buy crypto, you want to buy stablecoin, we have built it in the Ultimate Rewards reward portal. You can do cashback, you can do travel, you can transfer, and you can invest. Like, what? Build it yourself. You're JPMorganChase. So I guess that's kind of where I like feel that banks like a year ago really worried about being left behind. We're really scrambling to announce anything. JP Morgan gets a lot of attention for being seen as more innovative than it is from this partnership because this partnership is crap. And then also like has to realize like, oh, we hate this guy. We are not aligned with this guy. This guy is not a good partner. And and again, and I hate to be like this, but like if JP Morgan Chase can't do due diligence on Frank with Charlie Jarvis, and so they get owned and tricked and then have to do so. And then they have this Coinbase partnership.
Yeah.
Like, get it together. Stop doing things because you're freaking out about being left behind. And when we're freaking out being left behind, we make mistakes that then come back to bite us in the ass, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think the one thing that is different with Chase is like Chase is the biggest. And so
right. They don't need to do any of this.
Well, and I think that like their size, and they're very good at what they do, the core stuff that they do. I think it lends to them a certain like arrogance that's somewhat earned, but like I think they look at things happening in the market less as like, oh my God, I'm really scared or nervous about this, or I feel just super behind. Sure. I think they look at things less as competitors and more as annoyances to be dealt with, right? And so, like,
or neutralized, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like if you go back to July of last year, the annoyance they were trying to neutralize was Plaid, and so everything about this deal materially was about giving them a tiny bit more leverage to deal with Plaid in that moment in time. And to your point about like making mistakes, I wrote about this and podcasted about this at the time. The way Chase introduced pricing to the market was really miscalculated and lost them a lot of leverage. But because they're Chase, they have so much more leverage than other banks to play with. And I think that, as it relates to the crypto stuff, I don't think even in July of 2025, they were thinking like, we're behind on crypto. I think they were thinking like, we're Chase. We know what we're doing. We have people working on tokenized deposits. We have people working on, a blockchain for commercial payments and treasury management. Like, we know where this is actually going to impact our business. We don't think our ultimate reward customers will ever want to transfer their rewards into USDC. I mean, why would you want to do that? That's stupid. And I think that from Chase's perspective in particular, it was incredibly cynical at the very moment they entered into the partnership. Like, I think they went into it with zero belief that they were ever going to do anything with Coinbase or that anything was ever going to go in place. They were just trying to get a little leverage with Plaid. Coinbase, I think, was probably trying to see if they could capitalize on the Genius Act in that moment in time to try to get banks to be partners rather than competitors on certain aspects of crypto and just go like, you don't want to get into stable coins. You should just leave that to us. Like, we'll be your sort of stablecoin partner. But again, I think that was more about them as a public company trying to convey to the market, this is like what's happening, I don't think they probably had a realistic expectation internally that like, oh, now that we've partnered with Chase, Chase will cease all crypto and stablecoin oriented things. Like because we've partnered with Chase, there's 0% chance that Chase is going to push the clearinghouse, which it is a partial owner of, to build its own tokenized deposit network to compete with us. Like now Chase is not going to do that because we partnered with them. Like there was, I think, no expectation inside Coinbase that was going to happen. So this very much does feel like Coinbase saying, hey, we want to project to our investors that crypto is now here.
Yeah.
And post-Genius, this is like a moment in time where people should feel really bullish about Coinbase. And Chase said, that's funny because what we need to do is convey to Plaid that we can go around them and we don't need to work with them and they have no leverage.
Yeah.
And they just had this little press release party. I mean, this feels like another way I might frame this question is, do you think this ever rose to like a Jamie Dimon, like senior leadership at Chase level? Or was this literally just like PR executed strategy between two companies? Like, I'm not even sure, Jamie Dimon ever really even signed off on this or cared about it. And then he met Brian Armstrong or saw him on TV and was like, I hate that guy. And now in 2026, if you pitched it to him as like, hey, this is like a jointly valuable thing, we should do this, he wouldn't do it, but only because he hates Brian Armstrong.
Yeah. I don't know at what level of seniority the Chase meetings where they figure out their three-dimensional chess games in business deals are arranged and try to figure out how they can, strong-arm Plaid with a crypto company and get that leverage. But
I think it's kind of like who are we annoyed the most by right now, and then how do we channel that annoyance into a strategy to defeat them? And I think the general feelings of annoyance come from the top and trickle down, but I don't think it's like those people sitting in all of those meetings. So let's put it that way. So
I
not
want
a lot
to
of
see that
serious
Slack channel or the whiteboard. Okay, Alex, here. So this, heads up, you, me, any financial writers who listen to this podcast, here is another story where you can set your 1-year reminder to do a check-in on it.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to say words to you. They're not going to mean a lot of things to me, but I assume you're going to explain them to me.
Okay.
So more than 140 banks, payment companies, fintechs, and crypto firms globally announced what they're calling Open Standard, which is a consortium that will launch a stablecoin called OpenUSDC or USD, OpenUSD, so OUSD. It includes names like there's just a long list. This press release is like half names. And some of those names that we'll recognize are BNY, Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, Coinbase, BlackRock, and Standard Chartered. Unlike current issuer-led models like the Circle USDC, OpenUSD will distribute most reserve income among participating members and operate under shared governance, which should encourage adoption across the payment ecosystem. And people were reading in between the lines, like, apparently in these like chambers where we decide who our enemies are and how we're going to go after them.
Yeah.
The nemesis here that they're trying to take away power from or revenue from is Circle and its USDC stablecoin. So, Alex, what does any of this mean? Given what we just talked about with Coinbase and JPMorgan, how should we think about how big of a deal this announcement is? And kind of like in a year, what would you want to see so we know that they weren't also just trying to do a press release leverage gambit?
Yes. Okay. So all great questions. A little context to set first. So in the world of stablecoins, there's basically two big categories of use cases. There's helping people hold US dollars who want to hold US dollars but can't for some reason. And there is using stablecoins to transmit money from various places. So there's holding stablecoins and there's using stablecoins as a mechanism for making payments. Tether, a company you've heard of, absolutely owns and dominates the holding US dollars around the world use case and is not going to let go of it. They don't have to pay yield. They don't have to share any of their economics. They are, let's say, creative in the ways that they court customers for that business, even if it means, doing some kind of illegal-ish kind of things or looking the other way on illegal-ish kind of things, crime-adjacent type stuff. And no one can really challenge them for that throne. They own that market. And no one else in the stablecoin space is even really trying to get a huge foothold there. That's Tether's market. The other market is the much more competitive one, which is the market for using a regulated stablecoin as a payment rail. And the reason it has to be regulated is that obviously most of the places where payments go are places where you have lots of regulation tied
Sure.
to it. And so you have to play within kind of the regulated perimeter. Every region has its own different regulations, but fundamentally they all kind of look and feel something like the Genius Act. Circle got a huge head start in owning that market. And if you look at overall just like volume of transaction activity, so not stablecoins being held, but stablecoins being moved, that is dominated by USDC.
Yeah.
This is a challenge for all the other companies out there that believe, rightly or wrongly, that stablecoins will eventually displace other payment rails and be the rail that a lot of volume runs on in the future. So if you are a Visa or MasterCard or the clearinghouse or Stripe or PayPal, you are worried that stablecoins are going to be the rail on which all of this payment activity that you currently monetize eventually moves over to.
Yep.
And the real concern you have is that USDC offered by Circle, if that becomes the stablecoin of choice for all of that future payment activity, that Circle will have an inside track to build all of the value-added services and additional products that you can really monetize on top of USDC and lock out the Visas and MasterCards and Stripes of the world. This is actually a rational fear because Circle has, over the last couple of years, invested a lot in some of those other layers in the stack built on top of USDC.
Okay.
And the motivation for that, just to talk about the economics of stablecoins for a second, is that it's actually really hard to make money on stablecoins. Because you're not, as you know, Kiah, you're not allowed to do anything fun or risky with the reserves that you hold. This isn't fractional reserve banking. Stablecoins are narrow banking in the sense that you just give the stablecoin issuer your dollar, they put the dollar in their bank account, maybe they convert that dollar into a US Treasury, but they can't do anything crazy with it. And so you can really only earn Treasury-like yields on your stablecoin reserves, and that's the main way you make money by issuing a stablecoin is just holding the reserves. We have grown up with stablecoins in an environment where interest rates are relatively high. But Kiah, as you know, interest rates sometimes get lower for various reasons.
I've heard that can happen, yeah.
It can happen. And if it does, yield for stablecoin issuers will get compressed. And all of this, by the way, assumes that Circle's the only one out there playing this game. If Circle has other competitors, like PayPal offering its own stablecoin or Stripe offering its own stablecoin, then the competition between all those little stablecoins fighting for things drives the yield lower because they have to share some of that with the users of the stablecoin, which gets us back to Brian Armstrong versus Jamie Dimon and the fight over yield. The fight over yield is in some senses a fight to drive the stablecoin market into the ground, because if you're paying yield, you're not keeping that and you're destroying the economics of stablecoins. So all of that brings us to Open Standard and OpenUSD or OUSD, which is, I believe, essentially an attempt by everyone who cares about payment stablecoins, regulated payment stablecoins, except Circle, to collectively get together and destroy proactively the economics of stablecoins. And so, as you said, the way that this stablecoin will theoretically work is it's going to share all of the yield with partners. And so Open Standard, we can think of it more as like a nonprofit in some senses. I don't think it's actually technically being organized as a nonprofit.
It's like a cooperative.
It's a cooperative. Yeah. I mean, like they are only keeping the smallest amount of yield for themselves to pay for the operation of the stablecoin infrastructure, and they're sharing everything else with partners. Well, that is not good for any stablecoin issuer that wants. And so it's not good for PayPal. It's not good for Circle. It's not good for anyone that issues their own payment stablecoin. The other part that you mentioned, and this gets to the idea of like how much of this is a press release versus how much of this is real life, is the shared governance idea. And this has a long sort of lineage, because if you go back in time a little bit, you remember, Kiah, that Facebook tried to do this a while ago.
I was so not paying attention when that happened.
Talk about going way back in time. Like this feels like 1,000 years ago. But Facebook, once upon a time, tried to launch Libra, which was a stablecoin. And one of the pitches around Libra was that it wasn't a Facebook thing. It was like a Facebook organized thing, but there was going to be a totally separate organization that managed the Libra stablecoin, and it was going to be this decentralized governance model where it wasn't controlled by Facebook and all these kind of things. That governance model sounds good because it sounds non-threatening, right? It's like, this isn't Stripe doing this. We're not trying to control everything.
Look, we're just
not
the
trying to own the world.
organizer. We'll send emails.
We're just hosting the party, but like it's everybody's party. That was really, really important for Facebook, because Facebook had a horrible reputation in 2019. I think they probably still do, but they had a really bad reputation in 2019. And so they had to make it feel like this wasn't like a Facebook thing. This is like, and that didn't work. And that's one of the reasons that it sunk it. But even with Stripe having a comparatively better reputation than Facebook had in 2019, I still think it's really, really hard to manage something in a totally decentralized, way. Like,
sure.
The way you can kind of test this idea is by just poking at it and asking questions like, okay, you say Open Standard is going to be governed by a board made up of lots of different members, not just controlled by Stripe. Well, okay, who's on the board?
Who picks the board?
Who picks the board? And how long is the tenure of all the different parties on the board? Who's making sure that the representation on the board equally represents different interests from otherwise competitive parties? Like, for example, does Visa and MasterCard each get representation on the board, or does only one board member represent the card networks collectively?
The cards,
Like, that's a question you could ask. Another question you could ask is, how are you representing the interests of smaller participants in OpenUSD? Like, do they get a seat on the board? Do they get one seat that represents all of their interests collectively?
Yeah, they get like a small institution's seat that has to represent all that entire demographic.
And is that fair? Do all of those smaller parties share the same interests? Like, there's lots of questions you could ask. Who, in the early days before OpenUSD is making any money, who's paying for this? Where's the budget coming from? Like, there's all kinds of questions that you could ask. So the governance thing is theoretically, in a press release, sounds amazing. In practice, it's incredibly hard to do in a way
it's going to be awesome. The infighting is going to be so good on this. If it goes anywhere outside of this press release, I want to know the fights that they have.
Well, and there are two sort of data points that sort of inform what that might look like, right? The optimistic version of it would be like, this is the modern founding of Visa. So this is like Patrick Collison at Stripe is the D Hawk of this. And he is going to bring all these parties together, and he's going to forge consensus out of a really competitive set of companies, and they're all going to agree to cooperate, even though individually it's not really in any of their interest to cooperate. D Hawk is considered a legendary figure in business history for a reason. That is really, really hard to do. And I would make the argument that D Hawk was successful partially because he was doing this in the 60s and 70s when all the participating companies didn't quite realize the network effects and the global scale and the opportunity of the thing that was going to be built. And they kind of entered into an arrangement somewhat naively or unknowingly. I don't think that's the environment that Stripe is now operating in. And so like Visa and Google and BlackRock and all of these different parties, like, they know the stakes and they're fully aware of what's happening. And so I think it's going to be much harder to forge consensus when there's much less like naivete built into this whole thing. So I think that's one thing to worry about. The other thing to worry about is, according to subsequent reporting after all this breathless announcements all came out about OpenUSD, is that apparently there's quite a few parties that were listed in the press release who didn't know.
No, that's awesome.
Members.
That's sick.
Which is great. And so, like, apparently there were a number of Korean companies that were taken by surprise and were like, oh, we didn't know we were doing this. There are a number of other smaller ones who I've talked to who were like, yeah, we agreed to participate because we want to find out what this is, but like, we have no idea what this is.
Yeah.
There's no information. Like, there's been no discussions. So this also, going to your point about the press release, this feels a little like we have to get the press release out there. We'll figure out all, like skate to where the puck is, but like we pushed the puck way out in front of us and now we have to skate very quickly to catch up to it. So none of this is to say that this can't happen. I will say, contrasting it to the Coinbase JPMorganChase story, this at least feels like one where the intention of the principles is for this to be a real thing, not like Coinbase and
we
Chase
would like this thing to already exist, but because it doesn't already exist, we have to kind of make it. The question is can we align enough incentives? And like, honestly, I think 140 is probably too many. I think I think if there's probably 5 companies on that list that could do this. And once they kind of have a thing, then they could open it up, and you either join that club or you don't join that club.
If they had like Stripe, Coinbase, Visa, MasterCard, and one other one, Google or something.
One wild card.
Yeah, like they would have all the actual participation they really needed. And by the way, probably those parties are the ones that are on the board and are steering this thing. And so the 140 thing is like window dressing, I think, in some senses, to make it feel more legitimate.
It's like the Declaration of Independence, like 5 people's names kind of mattered, but
right. It's like, that's a good analogy. It's like in the Declaration of Independence, Virginia matters, Massachusetts matters, New York matters, Pennsylvania, the rest of the colonies don't really matter, but we'll have all 13 because it looks better. I think that's a good I think that's a good analogy. And to go back to American history, even just the Declaration of Independence, that took months and months of wrangling just for one document, to say nothing of actually like doing something after that. And so they have a long slog ahead of themselves. I mean, other things you could flag about this story, is antitrust a thing, as we've been discussing?
I thought it was, but I don't know. I'm kind of learning that maybe people are not as worried about it as I thought that they should be worried about.
I mean, all the card networks are participating. I thought the card networks were already kind of an oligopoly where that market was too concentrated already, and they're all participating in this. That doesn't seem great from an antitrust perspective, to say nothing of Coinbase and Stripe and all these other parties. So I'm a little confused about that. I also, Amanda Fisher pointed this out on Twitter, there is a prohibition in the Genius Act for public companies that are predominantly non-financial companies from offering a stablecoin, from issuing a stablecoin without getting a waiver from regulators, without getting approval. Google is participating in this, and they are a very large public company that's predominantly not financial services. They are, I think, who that provision in the Genius Act was like probably written for, like them and like Walmart and a few others. Did they get a waiver to participate in this? Is this just a way to step around that requirement? So like there's lots of questions that you could ask about this. Fundamentally, I think the way to think about it is, and I wrote about this in the newsletter, basically the competition here is Circle needs to become Stripe so that it can monetize this payment rail that it built that it can't really monetize forever in the future because the economics of it aren't very good. So it has to build all the Stripe-like add-ons on top of USDC. So can Circle build Stripe before Stripe
builds
can build
USDC?
Circle? And Stripe was already trying to build Circle. It bought Bridge, which we know. It applied for a bank charter, a national trust bank charter through Bridge. It was trying to issue its own stablecoin through Bridge. But all of that, I think, was too slow to catch up to Circle and USDC. And so essentially what Stripe said was, well, why don't we just open source it? Like, if we don't care about the economics of the stablecoin, we just need the thing to exist and we need to be able to control it. Why don't we just open source it, give all the economics away, and that way we can fast track catching up to USDC before Circle can catch up to us. And I think fundamentally that's the bet that's happening here.
in observations that I just want to put into the record, but we don't have enough
Sure.
time to talk
We'll
about.
circle back a year from now. Yeah.
I just want to say we could have had a central bank digital currency, and we could have had one governing body, and we could have had
talk about decentralized governance. That's every voter in the country being able to govern it.
I get why people don't want it. I think those reasons are stupid.
Sure.
I think this is a slightly worse outcome, and it'll be more chaotic than if we just had a USDC, or sorry, there's too many acronyms here. CB, central bank digital currency,
a digital US dollar.
Yeah, and I think it's just really funny for me to look at these things and be like, okay, so are we like 75% there to a digital dollar? How close are we getting? Because I'm not in any of these parties. I'm just like, so when do I get to use this? When does a retailer that I use get to use this? When does a card network that I use get to use this?
It's also funny.
Central bank digital currency. So
the other thing that's funny about CBDCs is it's like, oh, we can't have a CBDC because of privacy and all these things. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't remember electing Stripe to digitize our national currency and just control it global. Like, I don't remember voting for that as a citizen. I would actually be much more comfortable having like someone I voted for manage the digital version of the dollar that gets pushed to every corner of the world. But because we won't do that in the US because we love privacy, we have by de facto elected Stripe to do that on our behalf.
These tech oligarchs who famously have our best interests in mind.
Well, they're going to govern it in a decentralized way. That's almost like voting for it. So it's the same.
Okay. So Alex, the next story, and I think the final story that we should talk about, to continue our through line of just picking up, companies or themes that were mentioned in previous stories, Stripe. So Stripe is behind this open standard. They also are making moves in some other kind of payment platforms, with the news that Stripe might have made, along with a buyout firm, I think called Advent, an unsolicited offer for PayPal. I know PayPal holds like a little bit of fascination for you.
It does.
And I was wondering if you could just kind of explain maybe this news, and then also kind of some of the considerations of maybe about the buyer or about the seller to us, and really why banks should kind of care about any of this, like, or can we just ignore it as just the fighting between the non-banks?
Sure. So I do, as you say, I have a soft spot in my heart for PayPal. I think of PayPal as like the original fintech company, at least in a modern sense. Like, if you wanted to sort of think about fintech as a 21st century phenomenon, then I think PayPal, that has its origins at the very end of the 20th century and the very beginning of the 21st century, is a good one to pick.
Buying stuff on the internet is not a problem we think about anymore, and you used to have to send a stranger a check.
PayPal's amazing. And not only that, but like PayPal's origins kind of dovetail with like the modern global economy, because Peter Thiel was a co-founder of PayPal. Elon Musk was a co-founder of PayPal. Max Levchin, CEO of Affirm, was a co-founder of PayPal. Like, David Sachs was an early employee at PayPal. Like, a lot of everything we deal with in politics and tech and business in 2026, you can sort of trace back to PayPal in Silicon Valley in 1999. So PayPal matters to me. PayPal is also, I think, one of the most mismanaged companies of the last couple of decades. After succeeding in making online commerce feel safe, PayPal has sort of proceeded to destroy almost all of the sort of brand value and equity that it had accumulated, either organically or through, to be candid, some very smart acquisitions of companies like Venmo, which also brought them Braintree. Like, they have some great assets that they've either acquired, Bill Me Later, one of my favorites, that they've either acquired or built themselves. And they've spent the last, 15 years sort of systematically destroying the value of all of those assets. This was, I think, somewhat masked by the pandemic and the fact that, like, when we all suddenly surged online and just online commerce boomed and everything, PayPal as a stock looked great just because of raw volume. And you remember the conversation at the time was like, oh, the pandemic just pulled forward this demand that otherwise is definitely going to manifest or stick around.
Of course.
Well, of course that didn't happen. And so the Dan Schulman era at PayPal kind of came to a crashing halt after the pandemic burned itself out. He was replaced by Alex Chris, who was going to get PayPal back to its roots as like a merchant-focused kind of business. That was an utter and complete failure. PayPal has since yet again appointed a new CEO from its board, which is always kind of funny because it's like, I'm firing you and hiring myself kind of vibes a bit there. And,
you know who was like leading all the criticism in the board, right?
Right. It's like, I don't think you're good at this job. I think I could do it better. In fact, I think I'm going to do it better. Like, okay, so that doesn't necessarily inspire a ton of confidence. And so PayPal today in 2026 is this strange combination of a company that has a ton of volume and has a ton of reach, and still, despite all of its mismanagement, I think has a lot of trust and a lot of brand affinity built up among small businesses and particularly built up among consumers. I can't tell you the number of people I talk to in my non-fintech, non-banking nerd life who are like, I'm talking about payment stuff or whatever, and they're like, oh, I use PayPal. And it's like in many people's brains, still to this day, PayPal means safety for digital payments.
Totally.
And so it has this asset. It has Venmo, which is still like huge, despite, I would say, Cash App and even Zelle sort of running circles around Venmo from a product perspective. I would say it still has a great deal of kind of inertia and brand loyalty built up. And this business that just can't get out of its own way. It has a ton of different divisions that don't work well together.
Yeah.
And it seems kind of from a culture and just sort of organizational structure kind of fundamentally broken. So this is the type of business that gets hostile takeover bids because lots of companies or private equity firms or others look at it and go, if they just had someone who knew what they were doing, they could like squeeze value out of these assets. And so my understanding of this latest reporting is that Stripe has teamed up with one of those private equity type companies to approach PayPal with an offer to buy the company at an above market price. So, at a price greater than their stock is currently trading, and basically convince PayPal's board and stockholders to just get out. And it's a really interesting deal because I think PayPal is kind of too big of a thing to swallow if it's just private equity making the approach, or if it's just Stripe making the approach. Like no one wants to swallow 100% of the mess that PayPal is. So the idea, I think, here is if we jointly try to do this and it's accepted, if this bid works, and hostile takeovers are always kind of a dicey proposition, but if it works, then we can basically kind of carve it up and we can each take the parts that we think we can extract the most value out of. So the question then would be, what are those different parts and how would that work? And, I'll just be clear. No one knows. This is all like highly theoretical. There's very little like reporting on this. The speculation is that Stripe, which is already kind of kicking PayPal's ass when it comes to like payment processing for businesses.
Right.
Stripe is less interested in the like merchant payment processing side of PayPal's business. They might value the ability to take Braintree off the board as like a competitor and a few other little things, but like that's not the why behind this. The why behind it is that Stripe has almost no consumer-facing business to speak of. And in payments, as you know, Kiah, it is tremendously valuable to own both sides of a network at scale because you can extract much greater economics if you own both sides of the network. And so the theory is that PayPal, despite mismanaging itself in many, many ways, still has that very strong consumer brand or multiple consumer brands. They have Venmo. They have PayPal Consumer, where people just have their payment credentials sort of tied into a thing and they hit the PayPal checkout button when they're buying because they think it's safer. My wife still does this today, despite being married to a fintech nerd.
I only do it if I'm getting more points on PayPal,
of course you do.
Category. And then also, I will pay my rent through PayPal so I can get the points, even if I get charged a fee.
I see. Right. So people are using it for various sort of
Stripe wants in on this behavior.
Yeah. They want this business. And so Stripe wants, I think, the consumer side of the business to marry it with their merchant side of the business and create more of a closed network. I also imagine that Stripe would look at PayPal and go, yeah, we wouldn't mind maybe picking off that stablecoin business that they've built. PYUSD is not anything to speak of, but it has some adoption and some market share. So they might fold that in to
Okay.
OUSD. You would see sort of, in effect, PayPal join open standard in a sense if this were to go through. So they might take the stablecoin thing off the board. And then there's some other little kind of random assets that PayPal has. PayPal has a pretty robust lending business, both on the merchant
Right.
side with
Yeah.
merchant cash advance and on the consumer side with its BNPL business. And so, that might be something that either Stripe wants a piece of because Stripe does lending to merchants, or perhaps the Advent would maybe want some of that business. And so
I see.
think
Yeah.
that the general read would be something like Stripe kind of plucks the crown jewels out that it wants.
Yeah.
Advent sort of takes the rest and kind of just does its private equity, cutting costs, squeezing value out, and then reselling it type of thing that private equity does. And collectively, in aggregate, everyone benefits by sort of breaking PayPal apart into its constituent parts and digesting them, is the theory.
Yeah. I think this makes sense, but the unsolicited offer was $53 billion.
Yeah.
And nothing that you described to me costs $53 billion or is worth $53 billion. And
Sure.
I guess maybe I'm too bank focused because this would be like a really big bank deal or like, a bank of a certain size. And so,
like price to tangible book
I know,
value
it really
is not.
It ruins everything to like be like, okay, price to tangible book, this is too much money.
Yeah.
Because the other thing too, and I think you kind of mentioned this, is like Stripe is doing a bunch of things in part because I think they're trying to speed up time, right?
Yeah. That's a good way of thinking
Open
about it.
like open standard sounds like it is trying to just gain a bunch of scale really, really fast to go after Circle. It could build Circle.
Yep.
But that will take a lot of time. And, in banking, one of the things we do is sometimes like if a bank wants to enter a new market, PNC wants to go to Colorado. Colorado is a state with good demographics, probably better than Pennsylvania or the mid-Atlantic. And so PNC's like, okay, how long is it going to take for us to build enough scale versus how much would it cost us to buy the scale that already exists? And can we find someone that's aligned? And that can be a lot of work up front and a lot of money up front, but then you'll get the scale versus like, kind of doing it your way one at a time.
How can we fast forward time? That's a good way of putting
and
it.
Stripe with this PayPal deal seems like, okay, the other thing I'm learning is Stripe just has too much money. It has too, it's like what they always used to say about Berkshire Hathaway, that like you can go elephant hunting. When you can throw off any percentage of $53 billion, maybe you're half, they're going halvesies on this. So if you're throwing off $26 billion in an acquisition, either between cash and stock, you can go hunt a lot of elephants, and PayPal's an elephant. And maybe it's worth it for Stripe to kill this elephant and cut it up and then, take some of what it wants, but mostly just won't have this elephant walking around anymore to challenge it in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I think it's less they're annoyed by the elephant and don't want to compete with it, and more like, we like that one tusk.
We like that, yeah,
we would
right.
like that.
Yes.
But it's like, I mean, to your point, and this goes to the bank example as well. I mean, as you know, and they talk about in bank mergers all the time, the question everyone always asks is like, how are you going to actually incorporate this?
That's my big question.
It's always the question, right? And like, I mean, this is a simple statement, but it's
kind
important.
Of easy. You're buying the same parts, like you're buying loans, you're buying branches. Like,
right. And you tell the employees, like, now you work for PNC, you don't work for whatever, like that's
First Bank.
to me. You don't work for First Bank. Like you're just changing the logo on their polo shirt or whatever. Like that's different than, and even that's hard with banking. Like the cultural mismatch of bringing in other banks.
Right.
It's still not easy. This is way harder. And so I think one of the things that you would worry about with Stripe is, can it absorb something like PayPal and because acquisitions are hiring essentially, right? Like you're hiring groups of people who manage businesses that you want as a part of your business.
Right.
You have to bring those people with you. Can PayPal people play the way Stripe wants to play? Like Stripe, as you may know, like they're famously very focused on culture, velocity, vibes. Like they curate a very specific idea of what it means to work at Stripe if you work at Stripe. Like they care a lot about that. Injecting a whole bunch of PayPal people who have been sort of
legacy,
adrift.
yeah,
like PayPal employees are. I mean, there's a sort of truism in fintech that like fintech companies don't ever want to hire banks or bankers because they just think banks and bankers like can't move at their speed, can't think at their speed, can't be innovative, can't be nimble.
Yeah, it's like okay boomer energy.
Right. Like we just can't bring that into our environment. PayPal is kind of the equivalent of that in fintech circles, right? Like PayPal is to Stripe what, banks are to most fintech startups. Like it is a very different culture. It's slow moving, it's bureaucratic. And I don't know how Stripe would deal with that. But going back to a point you made before about the advancing time thing, I do think that Stripe's interest in this, whether it manifests or not, does suggest that Stripe has on its roadmap, we need to have a very strong consumer component to our business that can help us capture greater unit economics over time in our core payments business.
Yeah.
And whether this works or not, I think it is indicative of the fact that they think that is something they need to get to over time.
Sure.
This deal is a way to fast track that, but I think it does also speak to their long-term ambitions. The other thing, the point you made about Stripe, paying for 50% or roughly 50% of this deal that I think is interesting is Stripe doesn't actually have money. And I don't mean they don't have any money at all, but what I mean is they are a private company that does not have a stock that is publicly traded.
Oh, that's a good point.
I
just said that they would use stock to buy this deal.
Well, I mean, and I think that's
so much money.
I think that's the theory, but it's weird to buy something. It's weird to buy a public company with private company stock.
Yeah.
And I think, Stripe is both sort of advantaged and disadvantaged by the fact that investors seem fine with Stripe saying private forever. And of course, the Collison brothers would prefer to stay private forever because it's way more fun to run a private company than it is a public company. But occasionally, it's valuable to run a public company when you need a lot of ability to just quickly raise capital to acquire a big elephant or whatever.
Yeah.
And Stripe can't do that. Stripe's main sort of asset that it would use in an acquisition is this illiquid stock that is very difficult to price and value. And I think that's
or they could
other
raise
reason.
debt, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and apparently bankers are participating in this deal and providing some of the financing, but it's hard. So it's inconvenient for Stripe. And so that's why I think in a lot of cases, that's why you see Stripe taking these creative approaches to solving its problems. Why are we doing OpenUSD? Why are we trying to buy PayPal but doing it 50-50 with Advent? Why are we doing these things? A lot of it has to do with the fact that Stripe wants to run itself as if it's Visa, but it also wants to stay a private company that can be nimble and privately owned. And it's kind of you can't really have your cake and eat it too. And I think Stripe is maybe bumping up against the limitations of you either have to stay small and nimble and private, or you have to become a public company and really become a competitor to Visa. You kind of can't totally do both at the same time. And this is them trying to thread that needle. The other small note on this is apparently based on subsequent reporting, Block, owner of Square and Cash App and other things, they are also involved in this bid.
Antitrust concerns anymore?
Apparently not.
Is the FTC looking into the percentage of payments running through these companies so that it gets a sense of the market share of payments? Because my question for you, Alex, is how worried should banks be if payments are getting picked off for parts from other non-bank payment companies? And
it's a great question, right? If you're a bank and you look at this, if PayPal gets broken apart into all of its constituent parts and gets given out to all the different parties that want the pieces that are being given out, well, suddenly Stripe has a really robust closed loop network that it can create, which is a huge threat to Visa and MasterCard and any banks that issue cards with Visa and MasterCard. So that's a problem for banks.
Great,
Banks just spend a ton of time building a legitimate competitor to Venmo and Cash App. Well, maybe what Block gets out of this is they get Venmo. and they get to just double in size in their core P2P business overnight.
Cash App plus Venmo, right?
Yeah, like suddenly Cash App plus Venmo is a way bigger threat in P2P, a threat that I think the banks thought they neutralized with Zelle because they had ended up at kind of this sort of détente where there was Zelle,
There's three.
Cash App, and Venmo, and they were all kind of somewhat equal. Well, this would be a way to get, like this would solve the three body problem for Block, and suddenly they would get a lot bigger. So I think there are legitimate, A, antitrust concerns, and B, there are legitimate competitive concerns for banks. And I think, the way to think about it for banks is, again, like, and there's a reason why all these companies are doing this, right? Payments is always the tip of the sword. And all of the sort of advantages and data and customer relationships and everything always trail behind. And so, like, I think the way banks look at payments is they say, well, payments is a low margin business. We don't care about payments. And what they fail to understand with payments is a low margin business, but it is also the doorway to customer relationships. It is also the doorway on both sides for consumers and for merchants. It is the doorway to data. And if you have data, then you can do all these other things. Like, to go back to PayPal crafted a huge small business and commercial lending business entirely based on the data it had. So it could underwrite loans while taking basically zero risk. That's a business that any bank would want. But they don't have it because PayPal did the really unfun low margin payment stuff first. And so you have to think about payments as sort of a land grab to then build the profitable businesses that you want on top of it. And the fact that Stripe and PayPal and Block and all of these very smart companies, and this goes back to the stablecoin stuff, this goes even back to JPMorganChase and Coinbase. The reason all these smart people and companies care about payments is they know it's a low margin business. It's the stuff that comes after the low margin business that matters.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I did not expect to find a common thread in our stories today that were all tangentially related to banking, but I think are, kind of speak to things banks need to kind of be aware of. And also, it is really difficult sometimes to find the through line in all the stories, right? There's just so much unrelenting news. And I think, you and I, right, our newsletters attempt to do that sometimes, but it is sometimes really convenient to have a series of stories that maybe like we can build some narrative out of. And from there, banks who were largely left out of these conversations today, out of these stories, they are bit players in a really, really big financial services universe, but to kind of understand what's happening around them and the ways that they're kind of being cut out or left out of the conversation. And also their competitors might be gaining in, leverage or power or whatever in consolidating. So thank you so much for explaining these to me. And I'm sorry that prediction markets can predict the future. If you're ever in Nashville, let me know. I've got a pool that we can hang out at.
I am excited about that. Yeah, I mean, next podcast and pool at the same time makes a lot of sense to me.
Good ASMR. Well, have a great rest of July.
You too. Thank you.